Welcome to Mental Health in the Time of Coronavirus, your computer-side chat with the experts. Today we will discuss, are we living through an apocalyptic presidency? I am Dr. Bandy Lee, president of the World Mental Health Coalition, a professional organization that focuses on having healthy leadership so as to help promote societal mental health. Today, we have two distinguished speakers, both valuable contributors to the dangerous case of Donald Trump. First will be Dr. Thomas Singer, a psychiatrist and Jungian psychoanalyst practicing in San Francisco, who has served on Social Security's Hearing and Appeals Mental Impairment Disability Team. He is the editor of multiple books, including Cultural Complexes and the Soul of America. Next will be Dr. Lise Van Susteren, a general and forensic psychiatrist at Georgetown University, an expert on the physical and mental health impacts of climate change, and a consultant to the U.S. government profiling world leaders. She has authored multiple books, including her latest, Emotional Inflammation. We welcome them both. Tom, would you like to begin?
Apocalyptic refers to the end of time, and in ancient time it was linked to final judgment. Today, apocalyptic thinking might prompt those on the left to see the pandemic as a judgment for our president's sins, or on the right, as was recently reported, for the chaplain of the president's cabinet to say that the pandemic is a judgment for homosexuals and environmentalists. An important forgotten part of the original Greek word apocalypse is also the notion of unveiling, a revelation of the more hidden meaning and direction of the creation itself. Noam Chomsky wrote quite starkly and simply in The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, there are two huge dangers that the human species face. We are in a situation where we need to decide whether the species survives in any decent form. One is the rising danger of nuclear war, which is quite serious, and the other is environmental catastrophe. He wrote this, of course, before the pandemic, which one can think of as an environmental catastrophe. When we begin to talk about the survival of the human species and all other animal and plant life, we are in the realm of apocalypse. Apocalyptic thinking and prophecy is as old as the human species, and our fears for the survival of the planet as we know it are very alive and real today. It is part of the spirit and reality of the times, as well as what Jung referred to or termed the spirit of the depths, recurring themes of life and death, suffering and joy, meaning or meaninglessness throughout human history. Today, I believe that the planet has been seized by what I call extinction anxiety. Appropriately enough, the term extinction anxiety literally popped into mind when I was working on a paper about Donald Trump. Some groups, such as anti-nuclear and climate change activists, recognize the threat of extinction directly. But I would like to suggest that many other groups around the world experience extinction anxiety more indirectly, in the fear that their unique identities and very existence are threatened. Whites, blacks, women, men, Latinos, Jews, Muslims, gays, 60 million refugees around the globe are just a few of the groups in the grips of fear for their own survival. Could it be that they are all tapping into a deeper underlying extinction anxiety, which is the global psyche's equivalent to the anxiety about death in the individual? I believe that extinction anxiety acts as a psychic, radioactive background in our global society and that it fuels many of our concerns. Imagine for a moment that everyone you see walking down the street or sitting in a coffee house communicating on their cell phone or computer is actually sending out billions of the same daily latent message. It hasn't happened yet. What if our frantic interconnectivity is a global SOS expression of extinction anxiety and that we are desperately clinging to one another in an effort to reassure ourselves that we are not on a sinking or exploding ship? There is no doubt that Trump fuels extinction anxiety and apocalyptic fears. But we may do well to recognize that apocalyptic and Trump or presidency may get linked in our minds, but they are also two separate things. That's my little statement.
Thank you, Tom. Next, Liz, would you like to begin?
These issues are something that burn very, very hot in me. And I'll start with the fact that it's no secret that humans have been stupid. You know, we've done brilliant things, obviously, but we've done dumb things too. And one of my favorite books is written by Donald Wright, A Short History of Progress. And in it, he describes how the pendulum swings between dumb stuff that we do, then we start over and build again. Then we get into fights and squabbles over scarce resources. We hit the repeat button, we fight, we start over again. So this has been since we dropped off the lowest branches in the savannah and civilization came to coalesce. And the point that he makes, and which is obvious probably if we think about it, is that we can't easily start over anymore. First of all, we're running out of space. Population has assured that we're running out of space, and we are certainly, with climate disruption, running out of time. So we're up against a wall now. Freud, long ago, talked about Eros, the god of love, of life, and the force of destruction, which people later named Thanatos. And that's the force in humans, the darkness, it's the god of darkness and death, and it's the destructive side in us. So we have on the one side, the drive for life, and we have on the other side, the drive towards death and darkness. And I think, as you said, Tom, it's so poignantly and insightfully that when people are feeling insignificant, when they believe that they don't matter, when they are fearful that they're not going to survive, and unless you've been living in a cave, you've heard what's happening with climate, whether you say you believe it or not. Of course, we know unconscious forces are so important in how we feel. And we have been up against the news every day. Technology has now allowed us to hear about every dark thing that happens around the world in seconds. So we have this cumulative emotional toll, the insignificance, the fact that others are frazzled and anxious, that the world is closing in with so much discord, political dysfunction, human rights violations, and gun violence. It's endless. So what we have is a population that is deeply insecure and deeply fearful. And I believe, and I think that this is something that you share with me, that when people are deeply afraid like this, that drives up and feel insignificant, that this drives up that Thanatos side, that drive to darkness. And so we have all over the world, it's not just Donald Trump. What we have all over the world is a coarsening of the political systems where we are looking to elect strong men who promise us safety in exchange for some of our deeply held or deepest held values. And so we are electing the Bolsonaros, the Orbans, the people who are in a sense less likely to be describing what we have always thought of as that more altruistic, generous, outward-looking part of ourselves. And this is to our detriment. Brain scans will tell you when you're looking into yourself, what you can do for yourself so consistently, you can not only begin ruminating, but you become depressed. It's when you look outward and you start thinking to yourself of what you can do for the rest of the world as a part of something bigger. This is the magic sauce towards happiness and, of course, a sense of purpose. So here we are in the midst of extreme weather events. Here we are in the midst of chronic climate conditions. Here we are in the midst of tipping points that have us up against the wall with extinction now at 1,000 times the base rate, with Arctic ice melting, our air conditioner of the world. We have the Antarctic, West Antarctic ice sheet melting. We are sure to have sea level rise, searing temperatures. We have all of those things. And up against that, we have an administration here that, of course, has withdrawn from the climate accords, continues to subsidize fossil fuels, has rolled back regulations on mercury, and is now in the coronavirus authorized the EPA to roll back regulations on clean air, clean water. And so here we are in the midst of a deeply anguished and terrifying time.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to questions from the public. As usual, we have received far too many than we can cover, but we will sample a few. First question. I am in a state of constant anxiety from the pandemic because of Trump's refusal to deal with it in a scientific manner. He's making it worse by both his actions and inaction. How do we cope with this anxiety?
Well, with difficulty. It is not easy to live in a chaotic environment. The president, the presidency, in a sense, is a lot like our domestic life writ large. So just as children who grow up in a chaotic environment with a father maybe that's drinking and carrying on, or something in other ways dysfunctional, there is no doubt that the children grow up and some are very resilient and they recover, but there are often scars, and there's no doubt that kids are at a huge disadvantage when they're exposed to this. So it isn't surprising to the questioner that there's an enormous amount of anxiety, and we share it. What is a sort of silver lining to this is the recognition that this dysfunction is really being recognized by most people. Look around you, look at the polls, you are not alone. So the anxiety you feel is real, it's legitimate, and what we can do is think about the ways that we will change the system and look at November 2020 as the antidote to the feeling of powerlessness.
At least part of the anxiety may be what I've called extinction anxiety, and that it actually belongs to the whole world right now. And that often it's subliminal because we don't associate it with sort of a global catastrophe. And so part of it may be the state of living in a world which is deeply threatened. And of course, it makes all of us anxious. But the second thought I have is, it's a phrase came to me the other day, which is, the pandemic is not fake news. Fake news is the pandemic. That by toying with our sense of reality, by gaslighting us, what Trump is doing is he's making us uncertain about what is real. Is the pandemic real? Is it serious? And when you start to play with people's sense of reality, nothing makes them more anxious. In fact, the famous movie about gaslighting was based on distorting somebody's perception of reality by turning gas on and off and driving them crazy. If your sense of reality is being played with, of course you're going to be anxious. And our sense of reality, nationally, perhaps internationally, is being toyed with by leaders who won't tell us the truth. That's crazy making.
I think our future hinges on whether we will learn the lessons that the virus has brought to us. So we have seen that we, at great cost, and I'm not minimizing the economic tragedies, I'm not minimizing the deaths, I'm not minimizing the worries, but there's a message that the virus has brought us. And we are now in the throes of whether or not we will look outward and embrace a new way of living, a new way of looking at each other, a new way of looking at our home, which is nature, and the other species that are in it, with whom we have not only coexisted, but upon whom we depend. And we can ask ourselves, if that is the lesson, if the lessons that the virus has brought us are going to be sustained, if they're sustained, I have great hope for civilization's ability to survive. If we don't learn these lessons, I don't know at the pace in which we are closing in on so many tipping points. Honestly, I don't see certainly that civilization will be anything that we have recognized. It will not be something that if we survive, it will not be something that we recognize.
Next question. Throughout history, we have survived the vagaries of authoritarianism at great cost. Now there is an existential threat on account of climate change and nuclear conflict. Are we rushing to the edge of a cliff? Or do you see a global community ready to learn about pathological behaviors?
Steinringen, whom I especially like, who is an Oxford social scientist, and he likened many of the conditions in the UK and in the US to conditions in Athens, where Athens went down, and as he said, it was 2,000 years before representative democracy showed up again, fell apart because of corruption, certainly, and we've certainly seen corruption, because of inequality, especially economic inequality, and the apathy of citizens. And he said that he sees those three attributes in the UK. He said this 6-7 years ago in the UK, and he sees it in the US, and this was long before the 2016 presidential election. So there we have it. We have a choice. There's history, and there's also being smart enough to avoid pitfalls. And I think we certainly can, but we have to be determined.
What's astounding to try and digest is that somebody as corrupt and venal as our president could inspire in people a sense of being protected and safe by his vulgar disruptiveness. And so one has to ask, why does vulgar disruptiveness give people the feeling of safety and protection?
Okay, I've got a couple comments.
Good.
One is that bullies to people who are insecure and fearful are exceedingly attractive. That's number one. And secondly, 40% of the population, that means 60% of the population, which is more than enough to win an election, doesn't agree with the current administration. And if all 60% of those people had voted, we'd be in better shape. Third, the popular election was won by Hillary Clinton, Trump's opponent, by 4 million votes. And it was an artifact of an earlier time that we have an electoral college that once again called an election that was contrary to the will of the people, the American people. So we have some structural issues that need to be addressed, as well as the psychological, emotional vulnerabilities of people who seek or would seek a bully to protect them. The question is, of course, protect them from what? And the feeling of being marginalized, disenfranchised, irrelevant, for so many reasons that we've already cited, are issues that an inequality, economic inequality, the issues of, well, I was going to say immigrant scapegoating and things like that, all come from fears of being insignificant. And so that's a deeper psychological issue, and why a bully can sometimes be successful.
When did the celebration of ignorance and superstition trump the respect of learning and fact? Or as a nation, have we always remained just one step removed from torches and rakes?
Well, that's a great question. I'll take this one first, because it speaks to a book that I read that was written. It was written in 2008, which astounds me. It's written by Christopher Hedges. It's called The Empire of Illusion: The End of Literacy and the Triumph of Spectacle. And I keep this book. I keep this book right next to me, because what he does in the title, he says it all: empire of illusion. We are living in a time when fake news can take hold because people don't have the time to think about things, and they digest or they take in whatever is thrown at them, and it's powerful and it's seductive. The end of literacy answers the question, or speaks to the question that's asked, which is that in substituting illusion for literacy, you set us up for what the third of his triumvirate, the triumph of spectacle. We are a society now that moves from one spectacle, one big event, one Super Bowl, one NBA final, one big weather storm, whatever it is. I used to think it was a 6-week cycle, but now I think it's about a 3-week cycle where we have to move from one huge story to the next, in which they sort of superficially play over our psyche. And we live in a world of illusion and nobody reads. So and when did this happen? That's a really good question. I mean, there was a party called the Know Nothing Party in the 1800s. So people have liked to know nothing for a long time, but I think it's really dangerous now. The end of literacy and the triumph of spectacle. And that's what Trump feeds on. That's what he's a master of. And of course, illusion, no literacy, and the triumph of spectacle. In fact, that's a working definition of Trump himself: illusion, no literacy, and spectacle.
And then you began to see the news as something that was recreational. People got on the news not to learn, but to have an experience. It was entertainment. And we have seen a decline since then in the density and in the reasonableness and in the balance of discussion about issues that are so critical. And the people who land on television typically land there often because of their looks, or because they can say things in an inflammatory way, which then draws up a readership, and then you get advertising money. So the other thing is, of course, that our campaign finance laws really favor our ability to say and do incredibly divisive, dumb stuff. We can pay to say dumb stuff, and no one will, you can get through all of the loopholes that are embedded in campaign finance in our campaign finance laws. And then secondly, we have gerrymandering, which has meant that the most polarized candidates often are successful, because districts, the voters are no longer choosing the candidates are choosing the voters. So you redistrict something so it enhances the likelihood that people say things that are meant to rile us up emotionally. So we've got a lot of structural things that, God love us, need to be corrected if we're going to survive.
We're out of time. Thank you so much for your thoughtful presentations, Tom and Liz. It was so great to have you here, and so good to have the audience, and we're thankful to those who have contributed their questions. We will meet here again. Thank you. Bye-bye.